I'm doing something that a lot of people in my parents' generation think is a massive mistake. I'm not buying a house. When I tell this to a baby boomer, I can tell that it doesn't make any sense to them. Buying a house was for a long time considered the American dream. And even if the lifestyle wasn't incentive enough, owning a home was allegedly a guaranteed path to wealth. But I don't buy into any of this. I'm the fireman, and I'm trying to reach financial freedom before I turn 30 years old. And to do that, I'm not planning on buying a home. I think I'll reach financial freedom faster by renting. And I'm not sure I'll ever buy a home even once I can safely retire. But it's not that I can't afford to. I mean, houses in this area are extremely expensive. Like, extremely expensive. But by living on $20,000 a year and saving almost everything I make as a data analyst, I now have enough money to buy a house. Not in cash, of course, but I could put down a down payment and cover the monthly expenses. But I'm not. So, with this video, I'm hoping to explain to the baby boomers why I'm not buying a house, and to share some financial lessons that you might want to know if you're considering buying a house yourself. Reason number one, Mr. Worldwide. Buying a house is no small commitment. It's a lot of work, comes with some massive costs, and puts you into a financial contract that could last decades. If you're in a very stable time of your life, that might be worth it. But I'm not even 2 years into my career, and I don't want to make such long-term decisions. A lot could change in the coming years, especially as I advance in my career. And if you go to any good online calculator to see whether you should rent or buy, one of the most important variables is how long you plan to live there. If I knew I'd be in the area for the next 20 years, I'd seriously consider buying. But since this is so uncertain, I'm perfectly happy to rent instead. Plus, there might be very good reason to move. As I already alluded to, I live in an extremely expensive area. If I really wanted to reach financial freedom as fast as possible, I would almost certainly move to a much cheaper area upon retirement. Some take this to the extreme by moving abroad, where the cost of living is just a fraction of what it costs to live in nations like America. But even moving to a more rural part of the country, as opposed to a massive city, could save you tens of thousands of dollars per year. So there's a very good chance that I'll move within the next 10 years, either for better work opportunities or to reduce my expenses. And that heavily incentivizes renting for the foreseeable future. Reason number two, all things equal. A common argument for buying a home is that, all things equal, buying a house gives you ownership of a very large asset, whereas when you rent, there's no way to get your money back. But this comparison misses some important points. For one, I hate the argument that renting is just throwing money away every month. Whether it builds equity or not, you still have a place to live. You're still getting something in return for your money. But also, not all things are equal when comparing buying a house to renting. To buy a home, you typically have to put down 20% of the cost of the house up front. That's a massive amount of money that could have been invested instead. On top of that, it's not like all of your mortgage payment is going to build equity. Much of it, especially early on, goes towards paying off interest payments, which is how the bank makes money from its loan. Then, you also have to pay property tax, insurance, and maintenance costs on your property. These costs are often ignored by home buyers, but they could really tip the scales in favor of renting. So even if your mortgage payment is the exact same amount of money as you would be paying in rent, which is itself pretty unlikely, it still might be a better deal to rent instead of buy. Owning a home can be a lot more expensive than a lot of people think. This will change a lot depending on the area you live in and the properties you're comparing. But personally, I'm not convinced that buying a home is that great of a deal. Reason number three, all your eggs in one basket. Even if buying a house does pay off in the long run, I'm still hesitant to put so much of my money into one asset. To see why, we need to talk about what else I'm doing with my money. Currently, I'm investing almost every dollar I have saved in the stock market, with some bond investments to even out the risk. By investing in large index funds, I have effectively invested in every single publicly traded company in America, and some international companies too. What this means is that my investments are incredibly diversified, which means that a disruption to just one company, or even an entire industry, won't have a massively negative impact on my wealth. That is not at all the case when you buy a house. I would have to put almost every dollar I have into one financial asset, and its value depends very heavily on local factors which are completely out of my control. That's a massive gamble. A house is not a diversified asset. By buying a house, I'd be betting everything on one basket of eggs. Maybe it would pay off, but that's not a risk that I really want to take. Plus, if I did want to buy a house, I'd have to sell almost all of my current investments. That would come with a hefty tax bill, and it would mean I have almost nothing actively invested. By renting instead, I can make sure all of my savings are working hard in the stock market in a diversified investment portfolio. For me, that makes it much easier to sleep easy at night. Reason number 4. I might just be lazy. You know the stereotype of the middle-aged suburban dad that brings immense pleasure from making his lawn look just as nice as the nearest professional baseball stadium? Well, that's not me. I spent hours and hours in my childhood earning a few extra bucks by mowing lawns in the summertime. And I'll admit that there is some satisfaction in a job well done, but I have no interest in doing weekly yard work. And yard work is just part of it. Fixing leaky faucets, replacing kitchen appliances, and worst of all, plumbing are all things I could look forward to if I had my heart set on buying a house. As a permanent renter, I don't have to worry about any of those things. It's just not my problem. Maybe I'm just lazy, but that sounds like a pretty good deal to me. Those things might not be every day or even every week, but there's always something to be done. I'd really rather spend my time doing something else I care about. For example, making these YouTube videos, even though almost nobody ever bothers scrolling down and smashing the like button. Plus, if I owned a house, I'd probably need to own a car too. And yes, I know I probably made a few baby boomers gasp, but in addition to renting, I don't own a car either. I know that owning a car is maybe even more sacred to a lot of baby boomers than owning a house is, but I calculated in a past video that not owning a car will have saved me well over $100,000 by the time I reach financial freedom. If I can avoid making that purchase, that's a big deal. But if I owned a house, it would probably be smart to own a vehicle too, which I could use to transport things to and from my house, and to commute from an area where houses are a little more affordable. So, the inconvenience and hassle of owning a house is a substantial turnoff for me. I'd rather rent. Reason number 5. A house is not an investment. A house is not an active investment, and you can't just sell part of your house when things are tight. You have to sell the entire thing to ever get your money out of it. Buying a house is usually a speculative investment, which means the only way you make money off of it is buying it for less and selling it for more later. This is different from stocks and bonds, which may produce passive income in the forms of dividends or bond coupons. You can make your house a more active investment, maybe by renting out unused rooms on Airbnb or living with roommates, but this has its own downsides. You'd have to buy a much larger house than you would otherwise, and a larger house is more expensive. This is another reason that I really don't care to buy a house. Even if your house has increased in value, you aren't any wealthier. It doesn't matter if your house is worth $1 million or not. Owning a house does not give you financial freedom. To actually retire, you would have to sell that house and then use that money to live off of. And sure, once your house is paid off, your living expenses might be relatively low. But that might take a long time. I mean, the most popular mortgages are for 30 years. Given that I'm trying to reach financial freedom before I turn 30 years old, that really isn't that helpful. Reason number 6. A house is a savings plan for people that suck at saving. So, if you want to reach financial freedom early, a house might not be the best investment. So, who should buy a house? Well, for one, people that plan to live in one area for a very long period of time. For these people, it really might be worth it to buy a house, but you should still do the math to see if it checks out. And second, people that suck at saving should buy a house. Buying a house is a built in investment plan. If you're not disciplined with your money, it might be helpful to have a required monthly payment that you have to make. At the end of the mortgage, you'll at least have a large financial asset with your name on it. But I generally assume my audience is smart, disciplined, and wants to optimize their finances. If that's you, there may be better options for your money. Buying a house really is not as important as a lot of people say. In fact, there were a lot of lessons about money which I had to learn on my own. The most important financial lessons I've learned weren't taught in school. And that's why you need to watch this video next, because in that video, I talk about some important money lessons that you may not have been taught, which I'm using to reach financial freedom. I think you'll really like it, and I'll see you next time.